and start recording there. I should get the okay in a second. And let me go to our YouTube channel and share it. This is my I'm going to share it face.
That
That
means you do that right before you fart.
It's a poopy face.
That is indeed. Okay. Boop, 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 boop. Live now. Look at that. We're live now. Right. Is there a way to share it from here? Ooh, there is. Huzzah. I'm going to share it here. At Imran.
Oh, yeah. I should break out the guitar. Nice.
Hammond.
Oh, mouth harp.
Do you have a Facebook for Climb Out Network?
Yeah, Climb Out Network.
Climb.
It's a group. You're supposedly following it.
I'm probably in it. I just want to make sure. Okay. So let me go live now. Group.
Hammond, you play any other instruments?
I play the Chapman stick a little bit.
Is that anything like the skin flute?
No, that is not. I play the nose flute though. But no, the Chapman stick is a 10-string. Mine's a 10-string tap style instrument.
Whoa!
It's played by the likes of Tony Levin and let's see, Dave Matthews had one in his band for a while. John Myung of Dream Theater plays it. Blue Man Group uses them a lot.
You play it on your lap? Is it a flat instrument?
Yeah, actually, well, it's not. You don't play it on your lap. You actually strap it to your belt.
But is it vertical or horizontal when you play it?
It's vertical. Here, let me show you a picture of mine. Where is it? There it is.
Oh, wow. Oh, it's just the neck. It's just a big neck with 10 strings.
Yeah.
Why isn't that a guitar?
Because you tap on it instead of strumming. You use both hands, and the lowest strings are in the middle.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow. And the higher strings are on the outside.
So one side's kind of the bass side, and the other side's the melody side.
What key is that instrument in?
That's opened. It's tuned in fifths. It's tuned in fifths.
Oh, so it's like a 12 string a little bit.
Yeah, so a little bit like that. It's like a guitar and a piano had a baby.
Wow, that's cool. I never heard of that instrument. That's crazy.
But you've heard them before. Are you familiar with Elephant Talk by King Crimson?
Oh, maybe. It's not coming to mind right now.
How about
Yeah, make sure.
it's a famous one.
Over enough.
I'm sure I have heard it. I just didn't know.
Yeah,
what it was.
it's a very cool instrument.
Wow, why that? What
Well, I got fascinated. So back in '96, two bands at the same time were using them. Liquid Tension Experiment was using Tony Levin, and he was writing on one. And then Dream Theater released Falling into Infinity, and John Myung used it for a couple of the songs on that. And so from '96 on, I'd always kind of been aware of the instrument, but it's an investment. It's a boutique instrument, so therefore that just means expensive. And it wasn't until 2010 my wife got me one as a gift.
Wow.
Nice.
And you gotta know how to tune it and fucking take care of it and shit.
Yeah. And well, actually, so this is my second. My first one was a rosewood, and I had a really hard time keeping the neck straight because Utah. And
it warps up the moisture.
Yeah. So keeping it straight was kind of hard. So I sold it, and then the money that I got from it and some, oddly enough, some gambling winnings, I was able to buy the rail board, which is the same thing, except it's made out of tempered aluminum.
Okay, not wood.
Yeah, so it's got a different sound and it's much heavier, but I like the fact that I don't have to tinker with it as much. It's going to stay straight. It's going to stay in
What's
tune.
the name again? What's it called?
It's called a Chapman stick.
Chapman stick. Oh, I'm going to have to look into that. That's fascinating.
Okay. All right. All right, we're going to need to do the say comic really quick. On the count of three, if everyone can say comic. 1, 2, 3. Comic.
Comic.
Good. One more time. 1, 2, 3. Comic.
Comic.
Good. We're very close. Okay. Just a heads up, Imran, there is not going to be a sketching comedy next week. We're going to take it off, and then we can decide after the Trivia Geek show what to do for the remainder of the month, because next week is the last Trivia Geek show for the month, and then I'm off. So
yeah, I may need the next Wednesday off also. So
next Wednesday?
You can't have the one after. The one after.
Okay. Because I was like, no, you can't have.
No, the one after that one.
All right, because you can't have next week. I don't care what you do. If you're getting surgery, I don't care.
No,
Just do it from your surgical room. Yeah, it's a big one. So, all right. Okay, so I guess we're ready to go. And just so you know, we should probably make Hammond draw, right? Because Phil's not here.
I don't know. Hammond can do whatever he wants.
Yeah, we're teasing. So usually Hammond, Phil, and Imran draw, and Imran does everything digital, and Phil does everything analog, and it's a really cool mix when it comes out. And basically, Imran's just going to draw whatever he feels like while we're talking about our topic of discussion tonight, and at the end we get to see what he's made. I don't get to see it because my screens are full, so he has to describe it to me, and it works out really well because the listener needs to know.
Right now, it's Spider-Man holding a joint.
Yeah, close. That was one of my ideas, but I didn't go with that.
All right. Okay. If you can go ahead and hit record. Imran.
I have been.
Okay, good. Imran, if
I got like 8 minutes of us farting around.
I'm recording.
I do it every time too. Okay, here we go in 3, 2. On today's show, we discuss substance abuse in comics. You may think that the hero always gets the bad guy, but did you know that sometimes they go down a dark path like heroin or alcohol just to cope with their own demons? Our own sketch comedian Imran and special guest star J Hammond C are live on the drawing board, so stick around. The show starts now. Welcome back to Sketching Comedy, the show that teaches, laughs, and draws comedy and comics while you listen and watch from the comfort of your home. I'm your host, Carrie Sims, along with 2 very funny and superbly creative guys in their own way, Imran Javed and my special guest, J Hammond C from Soundography, Beyond the Playlist, and your newest adventure, podcast called Climb Out of Sobriety, or Climb Out to Sobriety.
Yeah, you don't want to climb out of sobriety.
Okay, yeah, I said it right.
That's crawling into a bottle.
Oh, yeah, well.
It's a different podcast.
Yeah, that's a different podcast. It's all good. So I just want to touch base. Imran, how have you been? I haven't talked to you in a little while. How are things?
Oh, things are good. Really, the most exciting thing in the last week over here at, I also host, I'm the nerd on the Jock and Nerd podcast in the Jock and Nerd Empire of Stupidity. Very exciting news. Anthony and myself we've opened the can of worms. We've broken the seal. We are probably the last 2 people on earth who have now dived into the Game of Thrones.
Oh,
yes.
Really?
It's got a lot of people excited. And usually I get obsessed about everything. And boy, is there a lot to get obsessed about. So there will be Game of Thrones discussion on the Jock and Nerd now. It's very exciting.
So you just started the whole series?
I'm in 1 season. I've watched the first season completely.
I'm going to have to message you later and tell you which episode I want to be on after you've watched it. So
okay, yeah, it's weird because we don't know how we're going to talk about it on our show because I'm 6 years late and I got 14 months to catch up for the last big final cultural event. But man, everybody was talking about it and we finally pulled the trigger And we're very happy that we did.
Yes.
So I actually had to binge watch the first 4 seasons in like 5 weeks.
Oh,
so I could qualify to be on Joel Duggan's Citadel Cafe when he does the Game of Thrones talk.
Really?
What did that do to you? Did that affect you in any way?
A lot of dragons and boobs.
Yeah.
Not bad. It's not a bad thing.
No, it's not. It's not. And that voice that you hear is J Hammond C. Hammond, it's great to have you with us. You have invoked a really interesting topic for us tonight. It's something we haven't dived into yet. Basically, substance abuse in comics. And can you tell the listener a little bit about what's going on with your podcast, Climb Out to Sobriety, and your network?
So I started out Climb Out to Sobriety. It kind of combines the two things. It combines what I've done as a career with what I've been doing as a hobby. Mm-hmm. For the last 20, 25 years, I've been working in and around addiction, recovery, corrections, all those kind of things. And I've discovered that the resources are there, but in many cases, they're limited. There's a limited number of people. There's a limited number of beds. There's a limited number of everything, just because of funding and because of the way it works out. So after working in an adult facility for a short time, I realized that combining podcasting and that way it forms community with what I've been doing with some of the people I know, we could actually maybe do some real good in the world.
Yeah.
So we started the Climb Out to Sobriety podcast, which is a podcast that will be released weekly, where it gives you resources, information, stories, all kinds of just entertainment and education and information about being sober and living sober and things that led to addiction and how you can be helpful and how you can avoid being unhelpful and just that kind of stuff. But the other end of that, though, is the website, which is theclimeoutnetwork.com. And there's going to be a forum there that's going to be a private, secure forum for people to kind of have a sober living environment, like a sober house.
That's awesome.
And there will also be other resources behind that are attached to the forum. And they will have webinars. They'll be live. You can participate in Q&As, all those kind of things. But there'll also be exclusive shows for people who are members of the forum. And you'll be able to get extra information and access to our panel of experts. We have 3 therapists who I have known now for almost 20 years. Mm-hmm. And each of them is either a director or almost a doctor or an expert in their own fields that do amazing work. And I'm just kind of in the panel. I'm the guy who's more of the line worker while they're all the real clear experts.
Right. What I love about this idea is it really takes the idea of being sober global. And I think that's something, it's always done on such a local networking thing. A lot of times, like, alcoholism, they have the little AA meetings, lots of church things. It's so local, but this really globalizes it and gives people almost like a Facebook for sobriety, a good place to put positive vibes out there. I just love it. I'm really proud of you, and I'm really happy that you're here. And hopefully you can share some things with us that maybe that you know, and turn some listeners on to that. Those that might have been, maybe on the fence and not knowing really where to go. This is a really, really great first step. So, speaking of which, speaking of first steps, Phil Rude is not with us today. He is actually trying to deal with some hurricane category 5. It's always something, Phil,
Irma. Some woman named Irma is giving him problems.
I know, But he is battening down the hatches right now, and I want to assure our audience that he's safe and he's well and he's checking in with us, but he's okay. But we want to just send him some really good vibes down there and to let everybody know he's okay. So you'll
know Phil's house because all the plywood would have cool characters painted on it.
That's right. Well, if you guys are curious and prefer watching the live show and seeing the art created right before your eyes, be sure to tune into our show on YouTube every Wednesday at 8/7 Central. At the top of the hour, we mentioned substance abusers in comics, and drug addiction is a tricky subject to deal with. Taste and accuracy in any kind of fictional narrative, much less mainstream comic books, which are meant to entertain with stories about people with powers, mostly hitting things more than anything else. Having said that, addiction to substances is a real world problem. And if modern comics are going to reflect the human condition in any way, then addiction to substances is something that has to come up occasionally. Whether or not they do it well is a matter of taste, I suppose. But nevertheless, there are characters who have taken the battle, substances, addictions, and won, and some who have lost. But first, let's check in with the news. I always love doing the news because I always wonder if Imran, who is the biggest nerd on comics, has actually heard about these things before. But Imran, did you know that Comic Legends, did Marvel actually try to release a Daredevil comic without going through the comic code approval? Did you hear anything about this?
You know what? I saw this in the notes, and I actually did not know about this one. I know you'll mention the Spider-Man issue that was kind of bucked the Comics Code Authority.
Right.
But I didn't know about this Daredevil Punisher story.
Right. Well, Marvel actually almost released the quote-unquote Child's Play story without the Comic Code approval, but editor Denny O'Neil objected. He kind of put a stop to things. What was going to be in the Daredevil issue 167 through 168 originally was a special two-parter involving Daredevil and the Punisher called Child's Play. That dealt with young people getting addicted to drugs. The Comics Code would not approve of the issue. However, after some changes to the Comics Code, the issues eventually saw publication with some slight edits. In Daredevil 183 through 184, however, what's fascinating is that the comic book actually had two chances to still see publication before Daredevil 183 and 184. So first off, Marvel editor-in-chief Jim Shooter initially planned on just releasing the issues without the Comic Code of Approval, like Marvel had famously done with, as you were just saying, the Amazing Spider-Man issues, number 96 through 98, about drug abuse that Stan Lee had written years earlier at the behest of the federal government. However, Denny O'Neil, editor of the series, said no. The whole point of the arc was to have it reach as wide of an audience as possible, so he did not want the book to just be about a specialty item. That turned out to be the right call, as the code eventually relaxed its drug standards and the issues ended up wide audience a couple of years later. So the Comic Code of Authority has come up a million times, I think, since we started this show. You know, so I don't know. I think it's kind of interesting that Spider-Man was released. So talk a little bit about that. What actually happened there?
That was it was the issue where Peter Parker's friend Harry Osborn was hooked on, I think it was pills, but it started out with this guy tripping, like this 60s guy with a fro. It was on drugs and tripping. He jumped off a building. He thought he could fly, and Spider-Man saved him, which led him to this drug dealer, which led to finding out his best friend was hooked on, it must have been painkillers. I just remember them drawing drug pills at the time, but this was the one that they did not put the stamp on. And it's a great issue. And it's those moments in time where comic books they grow up a little here and there. And, you still have to deal with issues people have. And,
right.
They did it at 9/11. There was an issue where Spider-Man showed up and the Avengers were cleaning up the disaster there. But that it's a great issue, and it led to a couple of other important issues that we'll get into from other publishers dealing with substance abuse in comic books.
Now, Hammond, do you read comic books? P.S.
I used to quite frequently, and I did know about the Spider-Man one. I didn't know about Daredevil. What bothers me is that the comic code seems like it's outdated. I feel like the need for it is no longer necessary.
I don't think it exists anymore, though. Like it went through a couple of different changes, and then I think they just scrapped the thing eventually. Okay,
good, because it was still active when I was reading, so that tells you maybe how old I am, how long it's been since I read. But the thing is when publishers decide to step out of their comfort zone and address a real issue, you would think that it would be embraced instead of poo-pooed. It's kind of like when musicians decide to sing about something real, or writers decide to write about something real. It's embraced as landmark and important. And when you're dealing with the comic industry in particular, they seem to kick it to the curb and want to hide it.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
Well, it's kind of that thing where, are comics an escape? This is what people read when they don't want to deal with their problems. At the same time, the medium is such a powerful storytelling medium that can connect audiences and be meaningful and have a lasting impact. And it's a little bit of censorship too, in terms of the comic code. I never liked them.
Well, the thing too is, I know lots of people who use comic books to learn how to read or to learn how to teach their kids how to read because it's short and the sentences are, kind of short form. It also can teach you about morality. It can teach you about values. It can teach you how to conduct yourself in certain ways. Maybe you don't jump from buildings and wear a cape, but you do look out for the little guy. So there are lots of things it can teach you, whether it's an escape or not. It's still a medium for reaching out and actually, again, a mass impact on doing some good.
Absolutely. And even still, it's kind of like you, Hammond, who you use podcasting to kind of reach out to people. It's also a great medium for that. And like a good example is Fiona Staples, who has like this almost like transgendery type of a comic that is it's called Saga, that has all of these different types of animals and things like that, which teaches people about acceptance. And I think that's what's really great about comics. And it's a good place to put some of these things. But at the same time, I do understand the adverse side of that is, you got to be, a little skeptical on how you push it across, because you have to know what your target audience is. If your target,
it's still a business, they still got to make money. They still got to sell books.
Right, exactly. And I think that's where when they do things like, like the Junior Avengers type of a thing, or like Teen Titans, those are a good place to, maybe not make it so harsh, but also introduce things, because kids are going to get into stuff, and it's a good place to kind of say like, hey, this is what happens, and those types of things. So
the X-Men, this is why I love the X-Men. It's just the allegory for race relations and racism, and also homophobia and homosexuality on multiple levels,
right?
Told through these mutants, and it's brilliant.
Right.
I keep waiting for the Spider-Ham episode though, where he's hooked on smack.
Peter Porker, the spectacular Spider-Ham. Yeah, he's great.
Spider Pig does whatever a Spider Pig does. Having said that, let's get into a little bit of substance abuse in comics. Okay, well, so the first one that we're going to talk about is Tony Stark. Now, going through these, Imran was just feeding me article after article today. He's like, read this and don't forget this person and da-da-da-da-da. And I said, you know what? We're just going to talk about these characters and discuss their addiction. So Tony Stark as Iron Man, which is very, very popular. It's hard to imagine that he existed long before Robert Downey Jr., but throughout the years, this super rich genius battled countless threats and supervillains. But in 1979, it was Stark's own alcoholism that broke through his industrial-grade armor. And the storyline, famously known as A Demon in a Bottle, which you can see behind me here, it chronicles Stark's descent into binge drinking and losing his leadership over the Avengers. One of the covers is a classic showing a sweaty 5 o'clock shadowed Tony Stark staring helplessly into the mirror. And it's less important in its stab at exploring alcoholism as its comic book taking a character flaw and turning it against the main character, which is very interesting. While Stark's troubles are conquered a bit too easily, it remains a bold statement about what comic book story can accomplish. So behind me here is, the actual cover shows Tony Stark looking in the mirror, and he's got his Iron Man mask taken off, and he's just like he's just a slave to this
crap.
He does.
So great. Yeah,
he looks like an alcoholic.
It's such a crazy vulnerable image for a man called Iron Man, but it's a big part of his character. I mean, if you've seen the movies, it informs his character. But also, like, they did it in Doctor Strange too. Strange had a little bit of a drinking problem in the movie. But when you brought up this topic, he's the first one I thought about was how Tony Stark got over his alcoholism and in his Iron Man suit.
Well, what's really weird, and it's like I almost have to go rewatch because I kind of feel dumb about it, but I remember him drinking in the movies and things like that, I never really had read Iron Man comics before, but I don't really remember it being a problem.
They don't allude. Yeah, they don't make it a problem. They don't allude to it that much. They just allude to over his lifestyle kind of being, the problem.
There's the incident in the, which is it, the second one, where they're at the party and he clearly has tied one on.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Brody comes in and whoops up on him to kind of beat some sense into him.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a very veiled, it's very half-ass done. It's kind of a nod to it without actually saying anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
He's drunk in his suit at one point, right? And then he wakes up in the donut the next day or something. Yeah.
So he's rocking the Wheels of Steel with one of the Beastie Boys at his party.
Well, my question is, and Imran, if you don't know, that's okay. But what made him do this? Like, what was the catalyst for his drinking problem?
That's a good. I mean, the way you think Tony Stark. He's a billionaire. He's very hot tempered, very impulsive. I just think it's part of his personality that he would be an alcoholic. But I'm not sure what set it off in that specific storyline. It's a good question.
Well, if you have an answer for us, make sure that you tweet us at Sketching Comedy. We'd love to know the answer to that, because I'm actually very curious to find out. I like to always know what the reason and the cause is behind it. The next person we have is Karen Page from Daredevil. She was blind since, Matt Murdock has been blind since birth. Daredevil has always lived in the dark, but there was no way for him to ever see the events of 1986 Apocalypse coming. Murdock's ex-girlfriend and former secretary, Karen Page, returns, turning his life inside out. Karen reveals to him to have minor success as an actress before becoming a junkie and a porn star. Turns out Karen had sold Matt's secret identity for a fix, which in turn gets sold to Daredevil's nemesis, the Kingpin. Over the course of subsequent issues, Murdoch helps Karen beat her heroin addiction and rebuild their relationship. Wow, I had no idea. And I've seen Daredevil, and I know the chick they're talking about.
Yes.
And I'm like, she seems like straight-laced, and I can't even imagine that this was this.
So
was
here's
something.
the thing: they're gonna actually, for the third season, they may do the storylines called Born Again. Frank Miller, David Mazzucchelli.
Okay.
And if you watch the Defenders, little spoiler: the last shot in that Defenders of the whole series is actually like the first page of Born Again from the comic books, straight from the comic books.
Oh, really?
That was, they give you that little hint. And I don't know if they're going to do that with this Karen Page they have. It does seem out of character, but man, it's an amazing story. It's very dark. Yeah, she's hooked on heroin and she sells out his identity to the Kingpin. And I hope they do this in season 3, because it's dark and it really changes Matt going forward. But I can't imagine them doing them with the Karen Page they have.
No.
Although she has some skeletons in her closet.
Yeah, she's an ex-vampire.
Oh, she is.
Yeah, she was in True Blood.
Oh, she was in True Blood. Yes. She killed a dude in that second season of Daredevil.
She did kill a dude.
Still hasn't told anybody.
Nope.
You know?
Oh, yeah. That's right. I forgot about that.
Wesley, yeah.
How long has it been since Daredevil has been out? It's been a while since I've seen like new episodes. Has it been a year? It's been a year and a half.
It's been over. There's 2 seasons of it, so it was the first one. So it's been like 2 years.
Yeah, it feels like it's been a while.
Like 2.5, because I remember watching the first season on an elliptical in Hawaii.
Whoa! Really? I believe it was 2015. It had to be 2015. Yeah.
Wow. So
mid-2015.
So he helps her beat her heroin addiction. How? Do we know how? Does anybody know how?
I believe. I believe it's a lot of tough love.
Through the power of love. He plays a lot of Huey Lewis.
Yeah, a lot of cupcakes.
Right.
I mean, in this storyline, it's really Matt. Like, Kingpin doesn't destroy Daredevil; he destroys Matt Murdock, the man, and he systematically like ruins all these things in his life. So it's part of Matt coming to grips with that I think she sees and turns around. Again, I can't remember. I read it again, but she gets out of it eventually.
Always brings out really good questions. Our next person.
What year? This was 86, right?
Correct. Yep.
So what's interesting about that is that heroin wasn't quite what it is today. That was more of a different kind of connotation to it than it does now.
Yeah. In what way?
Because it wasn't as mainstream. I mean, right now, opioids and heroin is what everyone we're dealing with. I mean, there are task forces established to fight heroin and opioids right now.
Well, gosh, back in the mid-80s,
we're looking at the cocaine generation.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, at one point, heroin was used as a cure-all back in the 30s and the 40s. It was like, it was in your cough syrup. It just, people became addicted back then.
I remember when they were saying that, using the phrase, "Are they still taking the cure?" Which means you were still hitting the bottle of opium.
Right. Oof.
Methadone. Now you got methadone. But yeah, the amount of like suburbs that have heroin problems that you wouldn't think now, like you're right, it was a very exclusive selective drug. And there's another famous storyline we'll talk about in the 70s also about heroin. So it is interesting that they went to heroin for the drug back then, maybe because not a lot of people knew what it did and they could kind of write whatever
they could kind of make it make it their own substance instead
like
of something everyone knew about.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think I know who you're talking about. We're talking about Roy Harper and Speedy from Green Arrow on Lantern. With the limitations of the Comics Code and reluctance by comic book publishers to tackle real-world issues, drug addiction wasn't really handled by DC until 1971. In the Green Lantern's number 85 issue by Dennis O'Neil and Neil Adams, it packed a much harder punch. In the story, Green Arrow fought junkies armed with a crossbow loaded with arrows used by his sidekick, Speedy, a.k.a. Roy Harper, who is also a chick, too. I mean, like...
Yeah, in the CW...
we'll get into that. Yeah, we'll get into that. I get so confused. But Green Lantern and Green Arrow track the junkies to find Speedy with them, but he wasn't undercover, as they first had thought. He was there to shoot up. So Harper managed to fight off the addiction, and they took down the drug ring. But he was never the same. It hurt his relationship with Green Arrow, but... And this is interesting. It also led him to become a counselor to help others fight addiction. In the end, he became more of a hero even than he was before. So I believe
he's shooting heroin like on the cover of that issue. And it was huge. Like that was in the news. And it was right after the Spider-Man thing. DC's like, all right, look, they broke down this wall. Let's do our version. And that's a very collectible issue also, worth a lot of money.
And also, Neil Adams has never been known for pulling punches. He was one of those guys that was always edgy. Even when he wasn't being edgy, he was still super edgy.
Yes, it's very interesting. It's very interesting. The cover is behind me. You can see, as Imran was saying, there is a little bottle of heroin and a spoon there, and he's holding his arm. And it's saying that, DC attacks youth's greatest problem, drugs. So, I mean, I think this was kind of the era that things started to come out. I would think because the 60s really was like peace, love, and joy, and you were using drugs recreationally. And then all of a sudden at one point, it's like, oh, we have this huge drug problem. Oops. And, here comes the 80s with the war on drugs, and those types of things started to come out. So it's interesting to watch the comic books. And we've talked about this before, how comic books are like a historical record of time. And, they kind of go with the time of things. And it looks like, they're starting to break that out.
What's weird is every time they hit a bad guy, it said smack.
Oh, that's funny, smack. All right, anyway. All right, next one we have, and I was kind of shocked at this one. James caught it though, so he's definitely an avid comic book reader. But Batman, you don't usually think of with drug addiction. They don't kind of belong in the same sentence. If anything, the Cape Crusader is most likely to be addicted to glowering or brooding. But in 1991, Batman went down an unexpected path. If the cover art of a bearded, out-of-it Batman surrounded by his cape and scattered pill isn't compelling enough for you, I don't know what is. After failing to save the life of a little girl, Batman goes off the deep end, and he is introduced to Venom, which is probably something, I want to say like a steroid, it sounds like. It says that in the next sentence. Look at that. A steroid that makes him both aggressive and gleeful in his rage. And the experimental drug is also naturally highly addictive. The story doesn't pull any punches with Batman's withdrawal or the fight for his sanity. Like Bruce Wayne's childhood, it's a painful and tortured experience that makes his recovery all that more compelling. And from what I understand, doesn't Bane get a hold of this stuff afterwards?
That's the same Venom, yeah. The Venom.
Right.
Yep. I never read this. I thought this was really interesting, and I'd love to check it out. But I think this was like the very early when they introduced Venom. But to see an addicted, methed out Batman would be great.
Yeah, that would be pretty interesting. But I mean, I guess at one point as a hero, I think what's interesting about comics themselves. Is I've always liked to understand like what made them a hero or what made villains. Like what turns them into a hero, what turns them off. I'm actually watching The Tick right now.
So here's the thing, though, is that the bad guys never see themselves as the bad guy in their own story. Everyone's the hero of your own story.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So I think a great example of this is the second, like the new series of the Planet of the Apes, the middle one.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
it's a great example because everybody is acting in what they think is the best interest for the group of people they represent.
Sure.
Right.
However, then you make the decision as a viewer which side you're going to side with. Are you going to side with the humans? You're going to side with the passive apes? Or are you going to side with the bad guys? You're going to side with the active apes? Right. I mean, so there are all these things. And so when you are looking at really good writing and storytelling, the bad guys are never the bad guys in their own story, except for maybe like the Joker who realizes he's an agent of chaos and he's just doing stuff to do stuff.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. Okay, we're going to move on. We've got two more here. Believe it or not, Captain America. And we just did a show on Captain America, and I missed this.
So it's created by drugs, so of course he's going to be addicted to it. This is a given.
But this is funny. This is actually this is just insane.
Please tell me, because he's so old.
Uh-huh.
It's actually, like, what is it?
Viagra, Cialis?
Yeah, Viagra. Thank you for trying to save the joke.
No. Well, he was trying to take down a Manhattan drug ring, and this meth lab exploded. What happens? He absolutely goes insane. He gets all jacked out on meth. He beats the hell out of Daredevil. He shots buck, 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 like a chicken. And it's all part of this like heavy-handed 1990 storyline, Streets of Poison, that ends on one of the most obvious just say no moments ever. Quite literally, just say no to drugs. It's not one of the finest moments in comic book history, but it's still an interesting time capsule into America's war on drugs campaign. So this is way back in 1990. The whole buck, buck, buck chicken thing, like I started laughing and behind me you should see he's sitting on his bed and he's saying it feels odd not to have this super soldier serum inside me. Not that you can tell from looking at me. It would take months of inactivity before I'd lose my muscle tone to any great extent. So now what? Without the super soldier serum, can I still be Captain America? So he's like going through this like I guess turmoil, wondering if he does these drugs, if he's still really Captain America, if he doesn't do them, those types of things. So yeah.
So I have a little known fact about this, and that is that the original subject of the story was going to be Squirrel Girl.
Oh my God!
Nuts though, that's the problem.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, did you hear about the two nuts in the park?
No, what about him?
One was assaulted.
This is why we have Hammond on, people. Oh, okay. Our last one, and I'm glad I picked another female, was Carol Danvers, Miss Marvel. We did a story on Miss Marvel, but we did... Kamala
Khan, Miss Marvel.
Yeah, we did the younger version, but this version is Carol Danvers, otherwise known as Captain Marvel. She's often considered one of the most iconic female characters in comic book history. She's also one of the most important recovering alcoholics in comics. In one story, as her powers start dissipating, her drinking problem increases. Naturally, Tony Stark sees Carol's problems straight away, but it's kind of too late. Instead of dealing with her problems, Carol does what many alcoholics do with their problems. She runs from them. She quits the Avengers and tries to make a new life for herself as a writer. However, she fails to overcome her drinking, eventually getting alcohol poisoning. In a happy ending, she ultimately finds sobriety and starts regularly attending AA meetings. So I think it's probably...
That's Avengers Anonymous.
Yeah, Avengers. That's what it says. AAA. You know what? A lot of these superheroes, you think they all have drinking problems. You're out fighting bad guys. And
that's what I was thinking is, I'm watching you draw Spider-Man, and I'm thinking if there's anybody on this planet who should actually have gained a problem with substances, it's freaking Peter Parker.
Right. Absolutely. Nothing ever goes right.
He snapped his girlfriend's neck. His best friend's a bad guy. That is maybe even his fault. He's killed the Green Goblin a couple times. The Hobgoblin's chasing him. Yeah. He's got a doctor with extra arms chasing him. I mean, there's no reason he should be sober at any time.
No, and he can never pay rent for some reason.
Yeah. And he's got 3 different aunts that that he all lives with. I mean,
yeah.
Oh, yeah. And they keep getting younger. I don't know what that is.
Actually, let's phrase it. They keep getting hotter.
Yeah, younger and hotter at the same time.
Unnecessarily hotter. And all these chicks like him, even though he's a big nerd. He's got all these hot chicks.
I know. We could talk about Spider. You hit a nerve with Imran. You don't understand.
Let's start talking about Spider-Man.
If there's a chance to, the funny part is we're talking about all these people that have the the substance abuse, and he draws Spider-Man, the one that didn't have it. And
my go-to. Yeah,
it's his go. He loves Spider-Man so much. If he gets a chance to draw Spider-Man, he will be like, "Oh, we're talking about Spider-Man." At one point, there's a sentence being said about it. I'm going to draw Spider-Man. Woo!
It counts. Yeah.
Well, having said that, let's get into a little bit of facts this week. We're not doing fun facts. These are more factual things that you didn't know about drugs. Oh, no. I just broke this. Let me fix it. Hopefully it comes back. Okay, there it is. All right. Welcome back. So these are a few facts that I found out about drugs that maybe you know, maybe you don't know. And Hammond, please, at any point, feel free to elaborate on them. Number 1, drug addiction and abuse cost the American taxpayers an average of $484 billion every year. This number includes the loss of job wages, healthcare costs, crime, traffic accidents, and associated costs of the criminal justice system.
So I can talk a little bit about this because of my time working in and around corrections. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you that it's not just the addicts or the dealers that deal with this. Mm-hmm. It's the collateral damage. It's the people whose houses get broken into. It's the people who are the other car in the car accident. Mm-hmm. They are, the people who are in the stores when they get robbed. There's all this extra collateral damage that happens. And you can't even start putting a price on the ripples in the pool that each incident creates.
Oh, I can't even imagine, because it's like, like you said, it's the person in the car that is just maybe just driving themselves to the store, and somebody's either high or drunk and completely uproots their lives. And it always feels like something like that happens where the person that has the addiction kind of walks away from it. And
they're always limp because they're always high as a kite or drunk, and you naturally go limp,
right?
And you're thrown from a car, and the other person tensed up. What gets me though, and that's interesting, Hammond, that you work in corrections, is the amount in this country of nonviolent offenders that taxpayers are paying for when they should be getting rehabilitation like other countries do.
And that has to do with the 80s and how they changed mental health hospitals and how the war on drugs happened. And there's so much in there that seems conspiratorial and scary and collusive, making our government seem worse than it probably should be. But at the same time, it's the hand we've been dealt at this point, and we have to figure out how to make it work. And so one of the things we're doing is coming up with things like Climb Out, so people can get access at least to some sort of help, some sort of motivation to help maybe get them toward the right path.
Absolutely. And we're talking about almost fact number 2. Drug addiction and abuse can be linked to at least 1/2 of all major crimes committed in the United States. And I want to be clear about this. This is not a race issue. This is a universal issue. It affects the poor. It affects the wealthy. It affects whites, blacks, Hispanics, women, men, everybody can be affected, as roughly half of those taken into custody for violent offenses such as assault or homicide were under the influence at the time of arrest, which is absolutely scary. And like you were saying, working in corrections, I mean, I can't even imagine. I'm sure these people were brought in under the influence and then having to let them calm down and possibly have just caused a major offense. And now they're in a system. And the other adverse about that, Hammond, I want to ask you, is how many people are in prisons or our jail system because of minor offenses for things like, I think there's something, my daughter had brought up a quote unquote fun fact that your time in jail for possessing crack cocaine, like let's say it's an ounce, is like tripled than what it is for possessing cocaine which is virtually the same thing. But one is a cheap drug, and the other is a quote unquote designer, more expensive drug. So,
and I don't know how to speak to the exact statistics like that, but I can tell you that when you look at the justice court systems and the district court systems, one handles misdemeanors, one handles larger class A's and above. When you're looking at those kind of things, the justice court systems, they're run by, justice judges. They're run by cities. They're run by people who are trying to, it's different. It's not the same kind of expertise you get in district courts.
Sure.
And so when the justice courts kind of get their talons in you, sometimes it's really hard to escape justice court systems because they're smaller, they take longer, they have more things that can go wrong. The clerks can lose paperwork. I mean, if you ever pay a ticket, keep that receipt until the day you die.
Right. Oh, God.
Way, if something happens, you can say, no, here's the receipt for me paying a ticket.
Absolutely.
So, you have to take care of yourself. But, the difference between what happens in district courts and justice courts is night and day. And we're dealing with jail stuff. Everybody gets out of jail. That's the thing that everyone needs to understand is the average jail stay is anywhere from like 10 to 15 days because that's all pre-sentencing. Prison's the one that people don't typically get out of in some cases. That's the one where parole is and people get sentenced to life. So jail is the thing that happens before court. Prison's the thing that happens after court.
Gotcha. Understood. Fact number 3, the most addictive drugs are often just found in your medicine cabinet. Through a great many people tend to find focus their attention on alcohol and illegal drug abuse. The most addictive drugs are often found in the medicine cabinet. Many people become addicted to medications prescribed by a licensed physician to treat chronic pain, illnesses, anxiety, or sleeplessness. Others steal medication from friends and loved ones, and they purchase them illegally. And that's probably growing up. I grew up in suburbia life. I think those are the ones I saw the most. I didn't really see I call it the pot. I still do that as a joke, but I didn't really see the pot so much. I didn't see crack and cocaine just because I didn't hang in those circles. But I did see passed around in parties pills all the time. Like, it was like, oh, I was in my mom's medicine cabinet and she had Vicodin in her. I was in my mom's medicine cabinet and, she had Dilaudid or some, like, crazy, drug. And these kids were just taking them like it was nothing. And,
think about the psychology. It just, look, it's in a pill. It's in a medicine bottle. It's got a prescription.
Right.
This can't be bad. And it's everywhere.
And the other thing too is now drugs. There are other drugs. They're even as dangerous, if not more so. Things like Xanax and I'm spacing everything right now. Valiums and things like that. They can be as dangerous, especially if you start mixing them with things. So the withdrawals from Xanax, they're potentially fatal.
Yes.
Wow.
And that's a lot of people don't understand is the withdrawal. Like, they're like, well, let's say they're taking Xanax for like a week and then they just stop. That could destroy their heart and they could have a heart attack. And that happens. It happens more often than not. And, you can't just go on these like little benders and think that you're going to be okay. Like, oh, I just, this one time in the 90s, I just had like this little stint. No, that could kill you. And, you only can do this, wrong once. And that's it. So moving on to fact number 4. And of course, I have a nice little picture behind me because I didn't realize like some of these things were inhalants. Okay. And so number 4, inhalants encompass an array of office and household products. Users will inhale the fumes emitted by these products to obtain a high. Common inhalants include paint, glue, gas, and other chemicals, according to the National Institute on Drug Abuse. The largest at-risk group for these inhalants are kids 12 to 15. And if you look behind me, you will see things like Pam, Endust, Whiteout. I remember that growing up. Definitely. That was a big thing. Axe body spray is on there.
Wow.
Which explains a lot.
Who's using it?
I know, it does. And I'm like, why does it smell like drugs? But just
who hasn't sniffed a Sharpie marker? It's
right.
The huffing.
That's the whole reason you started drawing, isn't it?
Yeah, I was like, what is this smell? Oh, I could draw with this. Hold on. This is great. Wonderful.
So I have 2 stories. I have 2 stories to tell you. The first one is sad and the second one is funny. So the first one, there was a guy that used to come into the jail all the time. he really liked to huff.
Mm-hmm.
He used to deny his huffing, even though he had like an outline around his face from where the plastic bag was that he would stick the paint. Wow. He also said that the metallics get you higher. So just in case you're interested, there's the word from an expert.
He knows his stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. But he ended up freezing to death because his brain just stopped working. And one day he froze to death.
Whoa.
But he, at some point, got to his presentation was such that he basically just had two brain cells that floated around, and every now and then would click together and he would form a sentence. I mean, he was really in bad shape. So huffing is not funny. It takes its toll. Mm-hmm. But I now tell you the funny story.
Okay.
I was working at the outdoor theater at Sundance one year, and they bought this giant silver rock and roll truss for the proscenium for this outdoor show we were doing. And they're like, because it's theater, it has to be painted black. Mm-hmm. So they gave me like a case of black spray paint, a cherry picker, and a mask. 8.5 hours later, I'm finished painting.
Uh-huh.
But I've got a headache.
Sure. I would think.
Like a world-class headache. Mm-hmm. And then I drive home, which is like an hour drive.
Okay.
And I get home, and my wife looks at me, and I've got this outline of the mask around my face, which proves I was wearing it. Mm-hmm. But I've got black paint down my throat. I've got paint in my ears, like deep in my ears.
Yeah.
And that headache lasted for like 4 days. I literally wasn't right. I don't know if I was actually high, but I can tell you I wasn't right.
It's damage. It's brain cell damage.
And you haven't been right since, Hammond. It explains a lot.
Is I forgot my multiplication tables. No, I'm kidding.
Well, you can't. I don't think you could buy spray paint in the city of Chicago unless you go to certain places or you can prove that you're using it for work. Like you can't just walk into a Home Depot.
Yeah.
To get Sudafed nowadays in Salt Lake, you pretty much have to give blood and collateral of your first child. I mean, that's no joke.
It's behind a locked door.
Right. Well, and that kind of brings up a little bit on our last topic about marijuana, because it's, I think, when we're talking about controlling some of these substances and things like that, like locking up Sudafed and things, I've always been on the side of the good guy. Like, hey, I don't do them, so I don't want to be in a room with somebody that is doing them and can potentially harm me or the people that I love. But the fact number 5 is, though marijuana has garnered a reputation as a medicinal cure-all, the drug does offer its fair share of side effects. Now, I just to put this out there, I'm not against marijuana for medicinal use at all. I'm for it, and I know that it helps a lot of people, especially MS patients, cerebral palsy patients, and things like that. So I am for it.
Cancer.
Absolutely. Yeah. However, people still need to understand that there are side effects to anything that we take. It includes memory loss, learning issues, clumsiness, altered reality perceptions, and increased heart rate. So, if you have a heart condition, this might not be the route that you're going to want to take. And yes, this is like almost like that disclaimer you have, like, I need to take this anti-diarrheal, medication, but it may cause pooping and it may cause diarrhea, kind of a thing. But
that lasts more than 4 hours. Contact a doctor.
Right. But the THC found in marijuana works to inhibit the brain function and can result in long-lasting effects even after the user has quit smoking.
Wait, what are we talking about?
Pot.
Look, the THC is great, but it has CBDs, which are not psychoactive, and you could give these to kids that stutter and that have problems, and it relieves a lot of these problems. So it's just a matter of figuring out how to use it.
The delivery,
it's how to break it down and make it actually do what you want it to, instead of just passing it at a party saying, "Hey, guess what? I'm into fixing my glaucoma."
Right. Yeah. And exactly. And it's also about, are you doing this to get high? Are you doing, I mean, anything like this, any medication that we've had out there, that is in our medicine cabinets today, anything can be abused. You can abuse cheese, for Christ's sake, and you can turn that into a bad thing.
I'm glad you said that, because I wanted to bring up the fact that you can be addicted to anything. Just, it's there's food to purchasing, to buying, to television, to some less coffee.
Spider-Man.
to Spider-Man, some less harmful than others, but I think it exists in everyone. Yes. A little bit of addictive qualities.
Yes, I think so. And the thing is moderation, folks. Moderation.
Well, how do you know it's a problem, Hammond? How do you know that your addiction, obsession is now a problem?
Okay, so the quick answer to that, without going into too many details, was is it affecting your regular routine of life? Are you calling in from work? Are you missing work? Are you starting to ignore your family? Are you starting to spend more money than you have? Those are the kind of things when your life actually starts to change. That's when you need to start looking in the mirror and see what's going on. I mean, that's the easiest answer I can give you without like an hour with actual full-on people. But when your life starts to make changes based on what you're doing to exclusion, then you need to take a look at yourself.
Now that's well put, and I think a lot of people just heard that. Maybe a light has gone off, and they're like, you know what? You may be addicted to this one thing after all.
I mean, it could be even work or working out. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, when you have the trouble with you, the one thing you can always know is someone does CrossFit because they're going to tell you about CrossFit.
Oh, you get addicted to CrossFit. Yes, I've been there. I was one of those people, and then I'm gone cold turkey.
You know the problem that CrossFit vegans have, don't you?
What's that?
They don't know what to talk about first.
Oh, geez, that's good.
Having said that, Hammond, let's go to your ad real quick, and then we'll be right back. So throughout the whole show, Imran has been doodling. Usually we have Phil doodling too, but it's okay. He's not here today. But you've been drawing about our topic, which was substance abusers in comics. If you're watching live, you can see the finished product in just a moment. Or you can become a Patreon at Blazing Caribou and see all the drawings our artists have created and a chance to win them each month. So check that out. So having said that...
I drew too.
Oh, you did?
Look, there's a guy. He's
oh, good. All right.
That drawing. Hammond,
wait.
Describe your drawing.
Oh, yeah. Hammond, what did you draw? Go ahead.
I drew Iron Man smoking a stogie next to a mixed drink.
And I bet it looks just like him. Is it perfect?
It's the best stick figure Iron Man I've ever seen. You got skills.
Skills, Hammond. Woo! He participated. That's awesome.
You really nailed Robert Downey Jr.'s eyes.
Yeah. Oh my God, it's awesome. Hammond, make sure you sign that. We'll auction that off. Imran, what have you been drawing? Which I'm not shocked to know, but what have you been drawing?
Loosely related to our topic. Look, I said that the Amazing Spider-Man was one of the first to tackle drug abuse and not have the comics go against the Comics Code Authority. And I have an addiction to Spider-Man. It does affect my life and my family. So, of course, I drew.
Your kids' name are Peter,
Parker. Yeah.
All of them are Peter, Parker, Miles.
My dog's name is Thwip. No, that's going to be my baby's name. My firstborn will be called Thwip. Hey, little Thwip. Where's Thwippy? Come here, Thwip. You have a speech impediment.
Dink.
Snicket. Yeah, after Wolverine. So I got Spider-Man in a casual pose, hanging out on a light post, waving hi to the viewer, and a little white web behind him. It's just Spider-Man hanging out on a pole.
I'm really glad you put distance between his butt and the pole. I was worried at first.
That would have been uncomfortable. Yeah, he does it. It would have been uncomfortable bike without the bike seat situation.
Well, that's awesome. Thanks. And anybody who is listening, if you want to check that out, you can check it out on Blazing Caribou Studios on our Patreon. And make sure you listen every week to hear new fascinating stuff coming your way. Hammond, you want to take us out a little bit on how people can get a hold of you and your new site?
Yeah, so if you want to follow me, I'm at J Hammond C on Twitter. But at Climb Out Network on Twitter is the Twitter account for the show and the network. And then climoutnetwork.com. And the forum should be up. Gee whiz, it could be up on Monday, depending on how quick my wife can learn how to use the WordPress forum site.
Nice. Well, we appreciate it. Well, guess what, guys? Thank you for listening and watching Sketching Comedy, and thanks to our special guest, J Hammond C. Please go check out his Climb Out to Sobriety podcast and check out the website at climoutnetwork.com. Hammond, I'm super proud to have you as a friend, and I wish you all the best of luck in your new endeavor. Speaking of new endeavors, congrats to our producer, Ish Balderas Wong, for starting a new chapter in his life. What is this about? Are you going to tell us what Ish is? I will next week, so stay tuned. I love Ish for putting up with my horrible puns each week, and thanks, Ish, and good luck. And thanks to you, the listener, because without you guys, none of this could be possible. So thank you. You guys are our comic book heroes. We look forward to you tuning in next week for more animations, illustrations, and stories about the animators you love. And with that, our show comes to a draw. I've been your host, Carrie Sims, along with Imran Javed and J Hammond C. We'll sketch you guys next week, right here on Sketching Comedy. And we're out. There we go.
What's Ish doing? Did he start watching Game of Thrones also?
No, he actually got a new job. So